Well, welcome back to The Rise, everyone. And I guarantee you have never heard an episode of this show like you're going to hear today. I am joined by the incredible, talented, brilliant, and amazing Melissa Farr. Mel, as I all of us who know and love her. And when you hear Mel's Rise today, I guarantee you're not going to be the same on the other end. So if you're driving, walking, anything, just lean in, buckle up. We have an incredible interview and episode for you today. And Mel, before I tell everyone about you, just thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for
Yeah.
inviting me. I was so honored you thought of me and we got a
Well,
chance to work together again.
it is exciting because just for context for everyone, I've been Mel's client, and when Mel was working as a business coach, and what you'll hear today is life took a pretty dramatic turn a few years ago from seven-figure, incredible business coach, entrepreneur into the realm of the spiritual, the mediumistic, the mystical, which is really incredible. And we're going to hear about this rise today. And so, Mel, let me just let people know a little bit about your journey. Just you've been hearing the whispers of spirit your whole life. Like this didn't come out of nowhere, but your mediumship journey began at the end of October 2022. And it's significant for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. But the fact that, have a month and a date, those of you that have had life give you a real curveball, like might relate to, what happened on that date. And within a month of October 2022, you were on a plane to England to study at the Arthur Findlay College in Essex. And we might, hear a little more about that in your story. You gave 100 free readings, and within weeks, and everyone was begging for more. And I was one of those lucky people that got to experience your early mediumship work. You started working professionally within 7 months of discovering your gifts, and you're now bringing, you've been an entrepreneur teacher for 15 years and now run your own mediumship development circles that are selling out every single quarter. So, I mean, wow, that's just the first thing to say is just, it's incredible to have known you, before and after. I'm sure. Does life feel like that? Like before we get into our official, does life feel like there was a before and after in some ways
Yes,
this event?
100%.
Yeah.
It's when I hear you introducing me to say her life took a turn into the mystical or medium. And I was like, are we talking about me? Because you know me, I've always been very analytical. I love business. I love strategy. I've had a lot of clients who work in the spiritual realm, but I would say 8 years ago, it was harder for me to identify with them sometimes.
Yeah. And so I think that's off, isn't it? I remember someone I listened to a talk one time, and the person broke down, they were using figures from the Bible just because they're recognizable to people that have, like, grown up with that. But they're basically saying how every person who is like a memorable character in the Bible was not expecting or felt suited to the calling to which they were like, Abraham stuttered and he was supposed to be like this order and lead people from one country to another. And Noah had this. And it was essentially the point of it was like it's often not the expected place where we're called to our
Yeah.
true deep work. And so let's talk about this. Like, let's talk about, how did you discover? Can you take us back to the moment when you made the discovery that you were a medium?
Yeah. I love these stories because my clients bring them to me all the time. And, I got pregnant in my last year as an online marketing strategist. And I actually was working with an energy worker, which at that time I accepted that I was working with an energy worker, but I was kind of like, I believe in some of this, I don't in other things. And she said to me, we're just going to take this imaginary hand off your back so that if you don't want to run this business anymore, you don't have to. And I was livid. I was so angry, I could hardly contain myself. And I said, well, of course I want to run this business. Um, and a week later, I was like, I don't want to run this business anymore. And that I loved what I did. And
And
so,
we're amazing, everybody. Okay, so
and I still love business. We won't get into it, but I'm kind of being drawn into that for mediums just a little bit. So it took me 18 months to kind of clean up everything online. And in the middle of my pregnancy, I just said to my husband, I'll know in exactly 2 years what I'm doing next, but we're going to have this baby and I'm just not going to work for 2 years because I made plenty of money. I don't need more of that. I just need a break. And so that was our agreement. And I remember it was 1 year and 8 months. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. And I was starting to get that itch because I'd had so many identity shifts. It was New York to Colorado, non-parent to parent, feeling really fit like an athlete to postpartum cesarean recovery, and an entrepreneur to stay-at-home mom. Like every part of me that I valued the most of my identity was completely gone. And here we are 4 months away from me being at that 2-year mark and having no idea. I went to visit a dear friend. We were watching the Goop TV series,
Huh.
and Laurelyn Jackson, if you don't know who she is, she's a famous medium. And there was one episode called Are You an Intuit? And we watched it, and she was giving a mediumistic reading where she was connecting and bringing a message through from a past loved one in spirit to what we call a sitter, the person receiving the
Yes.
reading. And I didn't know any of that by then. But I had this weird moment. This was October 25th, 2022. And I just remember sitting there and I saw her and I was like, I know how to do that. Like, I know how to do that right now today. And it was the weirdest thing. And then I was like, well, maybe you're just a narcissist. I got so Rob started traveling to New York by that time because we'd moved to Colorado and he still had the same job. And I had like 4 nights in a row where I'd be alone. And I had this weird craving to get back into meditation since my daughter had been born. And I remember in meditation feeling two hands in my palms objectively. So sometimes you'll sense spirit outside of your body, like hear or see something or feel something. Most mediums work subjectively, so it comes through thought. This was an objective feeling of two hands holding. I knew both, they were each of my grandmothers. Didn't speak to my paternal grandmother 8 years before she passed. And I felt her come through. And in my mind, I just heard her saying, I know you're not asking for forgiveness, but I grant it. I'm not mad. I understand why you didn't want to speak to me. I was a toxic person, yada, yada. And I had this overwhelming where I just cried and cried and cried. And I didn't tell Rob for a week, and I tell him everything, but I was like, am I just going through insecurity because all my identity changes? Maybe I'm making things up for attention, which didn't sound like me, but I thought maybe. And then I had another experience a week later where a friend's father had passed.
Mm.
And he came through and told me that her baby boy that was going to be born in a week, well, that her baby was a boy, and that he wasn't strong enough to stay in this world, but that he'd be there when the baby was born. And so you know, it's unethical to just go give a reading to someone who doesn't ask for many reasons. But long story short, I was at her house and she was pressing me and wouldn't leave me alone about what had been going on. So I burst into tears, and I did end up first asking permission and then sharing with her. And she said, that's exactly how my dad was. And we don't know the gender of the baby, but 24 hours later, her son was born. So by then it's just getting crazy. So I hired a medium online who lived a town away from me. And with all due respect, the reading was kind of all over the place. And maybe it was because I was a horrible sitter. I just sat there freaked out because I thought I needed to be institutionalized maybe.
Sure.
And then she said, there's a man here. His daughter's having the baby boy. He said, you talked to him the other night. And then she said, and then I hired another medium and she said, has your paternal grandmother been talking to you all month? Because, she's offering forgiveness. And just enough little
Yeah.
moments with two separate mediums where it was validation that, okay, I'm not making this up. And there were a lot of other things. So finally, I was at a mama meetup with my daughter, and I looked across the room at this woman I didn't know, and I heard, go ask her if you can practice on her. Just try to give a reading. And so I walked over and I was like, this is going to be really weird, but I feel like I'm supposed to give you a reading. She goes, oh, I love that kind of stuff. And I said, okay, come to my house. So she sat down. She comes to my house. I don't know her at all. And I was like, well, I told her the story and I said, I'm just going to sit here for 10 minutes. It's probably going to be 10 minutes of silence and then you can just leave. So I'm sorry, you're not really going to get anything out of this, but let's just see what happens. I don't know how much time passed, but it was like 30 minutes later, and it was her mother's sister and then her maternal grandmother. I saw necklaces she had at her house, shawls that she'd never washed. I knew how both of them died. I knew when they died. I knew the final words, everything. It was a full-fledged reading. And so we both cried. And my husband came down the stairs. He's like, are you okay? What's going on? So anyway.
Incredible. And I want everyone to, feel like, Mel, what you're bringing up is so important because often when the big idea happens, I call it the download, right?
Yeah.
we question it because either it seems like such a departure, or it's something we know is so true that we almost aren't allowed to admit it about it. There's the idea,
Yeah.
like you said, am I being a narcissist, and am I being egotistical, and or do I need to, go get locked up? I mean, I've had, moments, right? And it's really the most true moments of our lives. And I really want to acknowledge in the rise, because what we're talking about in this show is sort of like a particular landmark moment or a milestone moment. And for you, it was
Yeah.
like this unexpected thing. You knew something different was coming in 2 years. You didn't know what, and certainly can't imagine if someone had said, Mel, on the realm of possibilities that you think it was going to be, this wasn't going to be on your list, right? I can't imagine it would have been. And now, and I love, it's almost like the Holmes Watson effect of like, you weren't the most woo-woo person. You weren't the person who's
I'm
just
still
all
not.
in. Right. And still not. And so what, like, tell us about how you work with people now. That was like those first moments where it's already coming in.
Yeah.
They went and trained officially in this. You now train people, right, in becoming mediums and also give readings. So can you share with us like how that happens? We've heard there's a sitter, you're the reader, and they're the
Yeah.
sitter, but tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, well, my preference, I do a few different things. I give mediumistic readings. That's really like what I specialize in, because there are people who call themselves psychic mediums or spiritual mediums. For right now, I just call myself a spiritual medium, but I work psychically slash intuitively. I use those terms interchangeably. So I do a limited amount of private readings where I will have someone sit for me
Yep.
and I'll bring through past loved ones. I also do spiritual assessments. So a lot of times when intuitives or mediums are coming into their gifts, they're feeling a little freaked out like I was.
Yeah.
They're wanting clarity, guidance, or they could have been developing for a while and they're wanting to know how to take their skills to the next level. So I do an assessment where I read psychically, I read mediumistically to connect with their guides, and I will let them know, okay, here's your dominant clairs, here's where I see that this is
Mm.
happening, basically opportunities and challenges. And then yes, lastly, I opened up development circles, and mediumship can be a lonely journey
Yeah.
depending on how much support you have
Mhm.
around you and a lot of other factors. So in a circle, we call it development circle. I usually have 12 to 14 people in a class, and we do all kinds of exercises. I work on strengthening their clair senses, which would be different than what we use as incarnated people, but we might see clairvoyantly or
Right.
know something claircognizantly. So we help develop that. And then I give them lots of really tricky exercises and have them give each other readings. We
Um,
do photo readings. We have guest sitters come in. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So they find themselves in a lot of different situations.
Incredible. What, when, because this has been a rapid rise. I mean, if you think about that moment of you realizing,
The only kind I know how to
I know,
do.
I know. It's just like to the supernova path. It's just like, let's go. And so so part of it is you don't know any different because you had a rapid rise in business growth. You went to seven figures very quickly. The versus takes other people longer. And so this is how you do life, right there. How we do one thing is how we do everything. So it's like Mel as, business strategist is not dissimilar as Mel as spiritual medium and teacher, of mediums now. And is there, I guess I'm just feeling so curious about, is there any whiplash, or does it feel integrated? You've had some
Sure.
time now. I mean, it's a few years late into
Yeah.
this now, but like, tell us, is there any, was there
Yes.
integration, like getting the bends in the new identity, basically,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, if you think about anything that you get really excited about, even when I started playing tennis, you have kind of this honeymoon period that almost feels obsessive for some, maybe it's a strong word, but really. But I think for many mediums, it's wild. I mean, you're literally sitting there knowing the names of people, how they died, specific things they said. You see an object that somebody has. I mean, I was bringing through, with my hardest reading was bringing through a 3-year-old boy who passed 6 months ago for his mother. And I grabbed my necklace and I was like, show me your necklace. Like, what's the commemorative necklace? And she pulled it out of her shirt and it had his hair in it,
Oh,
underneath her shirt. And I mean, crazy stuff all the time. But when you see how healing it is for people to get validation, to know they're not nuts, to know that their people are in peace, it's like, this is the most incredible job I could possibly have. This is amazing. I want to do this all the time. And luckily, I'm so glad that Spirit didn't assign me to this task until later in my life, because I wouldn't have known how to do R&R. And that can be really dangerous as a medium. It's not
Yes.
like it can't be dangerous in other industries as well, but as a medium, we're constantly working with energy, right? And that can be really intense, and you don't notice it because you're kind of on a high. You're
Mhm.
very much in a light meditative state,
Yeah.
not in a trance mode, but a light meditative state when you're bringing through a message. I lose track of time. I can't remember anything that's said once it's over most of the time. And so that energy takes a toll. And for some of us, we are high. I'm a naturally high energy person.
Yeah.
But you have to figure out after a while, how often can you read? There's a lot of really young mediums who might come in and they might do
Mm.
readings every day for a year.
Yeah.
And they might start to get physical symptoms, just basically burnout in different ways. But because this is so intangible, I think that's something that scares some people, is like, okay, what is the right balance for me? Or what about working with energy is bothering me? Like, is this a symptom of mediumship or something else? I don't feel that mediumship itself is dangerous for you physically at all, but I do think you have to be aware of
Yes.
spiritual boundaries and how much energy you're using in a reading.
Yeah.
My rule for myself is, if I'm not so honored and excited to do a reading, then I'm doing too many,
Yes.
you know?
And so I was going to ask how you do set your boundaries. And do you find like, do you find that spirits are wanting to come through you at times that you're not giving readings? Like, do you have to set boundaries in the spiritual world? Because I know it sounds like a funny question, but I remember when
Oh,
I
it's
was
not a funny
well,
question.
but I was working with shamans in England, early on in my career, and sometimes I would have spirits come through and I said, I'm not doing this at night. Like when I'm sleep, I want to go to bed. Like I don't want to be having conversations. And my husband would say, oh mom, you're special friends. Like that's the joke in our house. And I don't do this work professionally like you do. I just, those are my own, personal experiences. But they taught us boundary setting like around this. So how do you set those boundaries for?
Yeah. It's as simple as how you would set a boundary with an incarnated living person. I think you have to say it and you have to mean it.
Yeah.
That's what boundaries are about. Doesn't matter if you're talking to dead people or living people. The biggest problem people run into is that they say things they don't mean, because underneath the boundaries we desire to have are all of the emotional and identity ties that either allow us to commit to the boundary or not. I mean,
Yeah.
think about how many times you want to hit any goal in your life, and in some areas you really struggle. So you might say, I'm going to do this thing. And then you're like, God, I can never do that thing. So I think, especially emotionally, because just about every medium is an empath,
Mhm.
um, sometimes if you're a really strong empath and people pleasing has mixed in with that, and saying no is hard, that can be something. Or I've also seen mediums with a large ego or with not enough confidence,
Mhm.
comfort from spirit constantly coming to them to remind them that they have this gift. Um, but at the end of the day, I say my boundaries and I mean them. And I have a few different ones. One of them is, if I'm not getting paid to read or I'm not teaching a class,
Mhm.
I'm not available. My
Yes.
light is
Great.
off. I
It's
visualize a light
important.
switch going off, because
Mm.
if they see that your light is on and you're available, they will come.
Well,
That's
that's what I would imagine, and it's a question I know people are going to be wondering about. And do you teach that in your circles as well, like helping?
100%.
Yeah, yeah,
Because people will come to me like, I can't get away from them, or blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it's just somebody who's nervous, and sometimes it's somebody who wants the whole class to know, which I don't really attract those people, but I've
right,
seen them.
right.
And my response is discipline. I
Hmm.
mean, I used to think it's a dirty word. I don't anymore. A dirty word. Mediumship is a practice of discipline. It's about training your mind to focus,
Hmm.
and having enough boundaries. But really it's about the focus of a clear mind, so that
Yes.
at any point in time you can direct it toward exactly what you would like to bring in. It's not always that simple. Sometimes spirit answers the questions I ask. Sometimes I don't. Most of the time I don't have time to ask questions.
Yeah.
They come in with their own agenda because they've got 45 minutes. I mean, if you were going to come back after you died, you're
Right.
not going to come back and shoot the shit. Although
Yeah.
I had somebody yesterday who was kind of like that because they're a very social person, but you know, anything can happen. But at the end of the day, when you say I'm unavailable for spirit right now, I want to live my life, which is what they want us to do, you have
Yes.
to mean it. Because the last thing you want to happen is that you go to the other side and they're like, well, what the fuck are you doing here? You've been spending all your time talking to us. You're definitely going back again.
Yes,
So they want us to be.
right. You want to be present. And that's a great, segue into what have you learned now? Because you've been a business strategist, you know the world of entrepreneurship. You've now been a medium for multiple years and you teach. What should we all, the listeners of this show, entrepreneurs, like what have you learned from your mediumship experience that we need to know as business owners, right? I mean, I think, boundary setting, rest and recovery. These are is there anything that surprised you that you've learned as a spiritual medium that you're like, that's really important for entrepreneurs as well?
Um, Nothing I've learned as a medium in terms of like how it applies to entrepreneurship has surprised me at all, but it's all the same stuff. So you'd think that we'd be in two completely different worlds, but
Mhm.
one thing I've had to say to mediums that I would definitely say to entrepreneurs as well is you have to find your own style. You cannot try to be like anyone else. And if we're talking really nitty gritty and logistically, a lot of times as a business owner, everybody's heard the like, you've got to find your niche. You've got to find specifically how you help people. And I used to talk about the 3 Ps. Who's the person? What's the pleasure point they're going after? What's the pain point they're trying to avoid? And you have to answer those questions if you're going to sell anything, but
Mhm.
you also have to decide your way of doing it that is unique from anyone else. And when it comes to mediumship, it's an unregulated industry, just like coaching, which means that nobody's going to stop you from finding your way of doing things or your system. It could be good and bad, but the good side of that is that I always tell my students, be careful of teachers who tell you that you have to read one way,
Yeah.
or that you should only develop this way or that way. You have to understand who you are as a medium. And this is what's so interesting for entrepreneurs and mediums. You will be good at what you naturally are good at in
Yeah.
life. So for me, people call me up all the time, friends, family, when they want the good, cold, hard truth
Yeah.
with love and finesse,
Mhm.
but no kid gloves.
Yeah.
Spirit comes to me to deliver the hard messages.
Yeah.
So when I bring through people who have passed, I have to talk about apologies, abuse, suicides. I get heavy stuff all the time because I can do that with my eyes closed. It's not that I don't feel it, but this is,
Yeah.
telling the truth is like the reason I was born. And so I
Yes.
like to tell the hard truths. I see other mediums, let's say a journalist. Oh, they are all about the facts. They are all about the facts. Mediums who are EMTs, they always know cause of passing. Mediums who are animal lovers, they'll know if you had a dog or a cat and pass the exact breed, everything about it. So we have to work off our own frame of reference, but as an entrepreneur, it's not really any different. All the things that you naturally excel at. Now, you might be surprised where you get led, but you're
Mhm.
not going to be surprised who you end up being if you allow yourself to be yourself.
It's huge. I love this. Like whatever, whether you're an entrepreneur or a spiritual medium and you are finding your authentic version of your craft and your way of being. And even those of you, that you're training, they're wanting to have their business as mediums, like their own niche. I'm really good with the animals or really good with the medical stuff or really good with the, children that have passed or, who knows, like whatever,
Yes, truth.
someone's reference point. So what, we've talked a little bit before the show about this, and obviously our listeners, a lot of them are authors or becoming authors, and people are going to want to know if you are writing a book, so we talked about like, do you think about that in terms of,
All the
the
time.
way that you'll share your, people are gonna be like,
100%.
where's Mel's book? I know I'm going to get those.
Well, I mean, as a mother of one with another one on the way, I just feel like I have really focused this time around on all the ways that I can grow my next empire
Yeah,
and have an insane amount of hours of free time during the week. Right now I work 28 hours a week
yeah.
and have higher profitability than I ever had in my last business. And I never work weekends, I never work nights. I have plenty of time with my daughter. It's amazing. And I know that if I keep doing things that are leveraged that attract a larger audience, I can keep doing that. So I've been thinking about a book forever. Back in my online marketing days, I was like, oh, I'm going to write a book with Sarah
Yeah.
about sales. And then I was like, well, I'm going to write it while I'm my last pregnancy. And I remember being like, well, I feel like shit, so that's never going to happen. But then I thought like, well, I'm not really inspired to do that. And I went through that 2 year
Yes.
gap of thinking, what is here for me? And I remember my mom saying to me, Melissa, you'll have a career again. You'll make money again. And I said, but doing what? That was all I knew how to do. I literally felt like that was it. So
Yes.
for all of you who feel like you're at that desert moment of like, when's my rise coming? And then it was like in one day, and then the next 30, I knew exactly what I was going to do earlier before 2 years. And it just all flowed in. And I think for me now, I knew instantly, wait, this is what the book's supposed to be about. I haven't changed the fact that I'm totally writing it with you,
Yeah.
but I knew that from the beginning. But I think about it often. I don't have necessarily exactly what the book is going to be. Is it going to be a how-to book for mediums, or is
Right.
it going to be lessons from spirit?
Right.
One of those two, likely.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, in the next 3 to 5 years, I know that will happen. And I think there will be multiples.
There'll be and also it'll be like this where it's going to come in, right? It's just going to, it won't be
Yeah.
like, oh, you're going to, like, we kind of know, I don't know. I talk a lot about that. You guys know that listen to the show. It's like, there's the download that we get,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it's just like, oh, here's the book.
That's
It's
how I
like,
write all my content.
yeah, it's like being pregnant. It's like, oh, here's this one. Okay, and but no more, no nausea. So, there's that. The final question we talked about, do you believe everyone has mediumistic abilities? Like, this is a question people are going to ask of themselves. Like, do you, if you're listening and you're not someone who has had a particular, spiritual experience in this way, what's your take on that?
So I have this analogy I think is really helpful for people to understand. And the short answer is yes, I think everybody has a certain degree of innate ability to connect with spirit, because at the end of the day, we all have energy, we all work with energy, we're all affected by energy. And that's really all it is. It's just our past loved ones are in another dimension, is the way that I see it and interpret it. But my analogy is this: if you imagine, everyone in the world stepping up to learn how to play the piano,
Mhm.
some of them are going to be like prodigies. Some of them are going to be not musically inclined, and some of them are going to be anywhere in between. However, let's say that any one of those people in the world had the strongest desire and urge to reach at least a level of proficiency. Could they, if they put in the work? 100%. But is it going to be a lot easier for some people than others to reach whatever that potential might be for them? I think so.
That's beautiful. So cool. And I want everyone listening, like, right, if this is something you have an affinity for, or a proclivity towards, or any of those things. So, Mel, what do you have coming up? Like, what should we know about people that want to follow you, learn about you? I know you have a very limited amount of actual, like, readings that you open up. And your circles are very, they sell out fast. So what should people know if they want to follow your work and get involved?
Yeah, well, I am opening up readings. I open them up every quarter. So basically, September 1st will be October through December for the last quarter. So I open up a certain number of readings, spiritual assessments. But the thing I'm really excited about is I have expanded my development circles, and we have groups for beginners too, because what you were saying earlier, which is you'll know if you are, if you have these gifts, but you may not. You may not know that you have these gifts, because when you said at the beginning that I've been hearing the whispers of spirit my whole life, I had, but I didn't know. And it wasn't until this happened that I looked back and realized that's how I built my entire business that you knew me in.
Yeah.
I just got downloads, did stuff. And I remember my husband being like, that just worked. And I was like, yeah, it was very different than like, than manual power. So anyway, development circles are a place where even if you're wondering, sometimes the hint you have that you may have these skills is that you feel so strongly obsessed or pulled to learning about it. And that's it. So my development circles are 12 weeks, and that's where we get to practice readings. We get to practice using the clairs, like, okay, what do you hear right now through your thoughts voice? What do you see through your thoughts voice? What do you know? And people really surprise themselves if you feel like, God, I feel really called to this, but I don't have a good reason to say that I can do this. That's a huge thing. Or sometimes people have lost a past loved one, or they've seen a medium and had an amazing experience, and all of a sudden they get what I call like the big pull. So
Hmm.
that's my mediumship development circles are opening for enrollment. on Tuesday the 3rd. So I'm really excited about that too.
Perfect. So that's next week, everybody. So if you're listening to this when it comes out, it's just you're in perfect timing. Mel, thank you. Thank you for making the time to rock our worlds and open our minds, expand our vision today. And I'm so excited to see how the journey continues. And we're all going to be holding best thoughts for the rest of your pregnancy and your expanding family. So thank you so much for being with us. And everyone will link in the show notes all the details so you can find out about the upcoming circles. If you know, and I like that reminder. It may not be that you think you have a gift for this, but that you have an interest, you have a desire, you have a like that's a sign in of itself. I always say like the calling is the sign. So it's
Yeah.
like have that like pull towards it. It's like as most, there's beginner groups as well. So thank you so,
Yeah.
so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored. And I hope that everybody can take something away, even if it's just that 1% piece that makes you see something differently.
I know we all will. Thank you so much.